Hello, students. Welcome to Wild West lecture number 2. Today we'll be picking up where we left off with the Sand Creek Massacre as we begin talking about the Indian Wars between Americans and the Native Americans of the Wild West. Okay. Alright, so it happened in 1864 when 200 Arapaho women and children were killed at Sand Creek, Colorado, by the U.S. Army troops. Okay. So it started with the Bozeman Trail, an overland trail connecting Oregon Trail to Montana. The trailhead was crossing the Sioux hunting grounds. All right, Red Cloud was a native who led the asked for end settlements, and Crazy Horse, who was another Native American, ambushed the troops. And so, and in response to all this, and so the two ended up signing a treaty with the U.S., which closes the trail to settlers. And the settlers win, and the Sioux get forced to a reservation. All right. Although the treaty is signed, the leader of the entire Sioux nation that was watching this, see the Sioux at this time had their own group of people that were essentially united with other tribes, and they were kind of working together to fight off, what the white man was trying to take from them. Okay. So Sitting Bull was the leader of that tribe. Okay, there are actually some videos you can watch on YouTube where you can hear his grandchildren talk about him and what his reasoning for all this and why all this happened. So, okay, other conflicts and battles. All right, in 1864 we have another event where George Custer, a Civil War veteran, um, who was in the Black Hills and reported that gold had been discovered. And when white settlers came in, Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull began waging war against the settlers for refusing to stay off the tribal lands in the Black Hills of South Dakota. So U.S. troops are going to be sent in to force the Native Americans into reservations. All right, and this leads to what's called the Battle of Little Bighorn. Okay, which occurred in, I believe, March of 1876, when Colonel Custer reaches Little Bighorn, Montana, and faces the Sioux Nation, and they are slaughtered. Okay. To be honest, though, Custer was not that great of a general. He rose to power thanks to his role in the Civil War. Most of the generals had left the U.S. Army when the Civil War started, and so he was able to rise to prominence because of that. Okay, but when he was at West Point, he was the last in his class to graduate. So I should tell you a lot about him. And so the Native Americans, led by Sitting Bull, outflanked and defeated Custer's troops. And they kind of immortalize Custer, but I don't know if he really deserves it or not. Anyway, and this is pretty much one of the few Native American victories. Most of them were losses. Of course, most of these battles are spread out over time. So, anyway, let's continue. Alright, so here's a picture of Sitting Bull. You saw a picture of Custer. I like the hair. Okay. Oh, too far. Okay, so here is the Great Sioux Reservation, which you can you can visit the Sioux in South Dakota today. But you can actually see the path that Custer took to meet the Sioux Nation in battle at Little Bighorn in Montana, and they have a nice grave site that you could visit. It's kind of neat. All right. So here we see some major Indian battles. Some of the most famous, are of course Little Bighorn, Sand Creek Massacre. We also have the Red River War, which we're not going to really talk about what happened there, but that was another major conflict. And of course Bear Paw Mountain. But anyway, this gives you an idea. This trail was very important for white settlers to be able to cross. All right, and this went through the Rocky Mountains. This trail was created for settlers to get to certain parts of the country. You know, wait, something else. Man, Wounded Knee. We'll talk about that in a minute, though. Okay. In 1881, Helen Hunt, who was an author, exposes Helen Hunt Jackson exposes the U.S. government's treatment. She writes a book called A Century of Dishonor, which she talks about all the ways that Native Americans have been treated terribly for a century. We talked about last time how Native Americans were in the Southeast were forced by Andrew Jackson on the Trail of Tears into what is now modern day Oklahoma. Back then it was called Indian Territory. Okay? And so there's been all kinds of things. And if you one could argue, the two greatest tragedies in American history are slavery and treatment of Native Americans. And I think treatment of Native Americans is a little bit higher, just because of the way I mean, honestly, our American government does not care about these people, in my opinion. Okay, you just gotta remember that these are people too. Now a lot of them have American citizenship today, and I think you can get that. What's also interesting is that like we've had Native Americans compete in Olympics where they represent their nation and not necessarily America, or vice versa. There have been some that have competed for America. Um, the one I can remember the most is that there was a runner that ran a cross country runner um, out in Arizona, a small reservation called the Hopi Indian Reservation. They had a guy, I forget his name, but when he was interviewed, he talked about how the Hopi Indians would train barefoot and cross country and run in a harsh environment. So, which you can imagine that sounds crazy, but so in their high school in the Hopi Indian Reservation has like the highest number of cross country wins. It's crazy. It's pretty crazy and incredible in Arizona. But yeah, he used to say Hopi run fast good. Anyway, I'll have to look him up and find out his name later. All right, let's keep going. All right, so the U.S. is going to pass an act called the Dawes Act, which is going to try to assimilate Native Americans into U.S. ways. So basically, assimilation. This is one of your important terms you need to know. Okay, it means to give up the way of life and basically try to join American culture, and it's kind of basically going to be forced upon them. They're not going to be given much of a choice. Okay, so they're trying to Americanize them. Um, break up reservations. Um, and it's not to say like they're giving them civics classes, teaching them what it means to be American. I mean, there was definitely I don't know, it was a very dishonest portrayal of what it means to be an American, in my opinion. Okay, one of the things they did was they give land to individual Native Americans for farm raising. So I guess you could say that's a good thing, but these plain Indians are not, you know, are not probably not used to that sort of thing. All right. So everything in these black patterns are lands that are held by Indians, okay, or they've been returned to Indiana, okay. Um, and so the largest of which is in Oklahoma and Arizona, and like I said, these are the ones here that used to live all over here, okay. But yeah, this here is the Navajo. I believe it's the largest reservation. And like I was telling you about the Hopi, they live inside of that reservation somewhere in the middle. Like the Hopi Reservation, the Grand Canyon is in the middle of the Hopi Reservation. So if you're at the Grand Canyon, then you're in the Hopi Reservation. Alright, destruction of the buffalo. Alright, so this is probably the biggest tribal life blow to the Native Americans was the buffalo, okay? And so these tourists would come in, fur traders. They would use the skin. What was? They would take the buffalo and turn it into leather and use it for machinery in factories in the East. Okay, so the buffalo, the Americans found great uses for it too. The problem is we started overhunting them. Okay, so 1800 there were 65 million buffalo roaming the plains. In 1890 there were less than 1,000. Actually, I think some people claim they could barely find like 300. But that's a significant blow. And these buffalo roamed all over America. This is one of the few animals, one of the big, great animals of the world that is native to our country, our region. So that's really sad. And Native Americans depended on the buffalo for support. All right. So one of the things that happened in the 1880s and 90s was the ghost dance. All right, and this was a ritual they started performing to try to regain the lost lands that was taken by white settlers. Well, they're not just white; it's primarily white. So don't just assume that it was just white settlers. There were black settlers that also moved in. They were called exodusters, but we'll get to that another time. Okay. Um, so this began spreading among the Sioux on the Dakota Reservation, and on December 15th, 1890, Sitting Bull was killed when reservation police tried to arrest him. And then a few days later, on December 29th of 1890, the 7th Cavalry, this was the Custer's Old Regiment, they surround the Lakota Sioux, performing the ghost dance at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. A shot was fired trying to unarm the Sioux, and the 7th Cavalry slaughtered 300 unarmed Native Americans. And what happened to the 300 unarmed Native Americans would be the last of the Indian Wars. The Indian Wars would now end. All right, and it was for almost 30 years, the Native Americans were fighting in the West in the Great Plains against the American troops. Okay, but now it's over. This is actually Wavoka. He's a Paiute spiritual reader, and he's the one who created the ghost dance. Okay, and then you have Buffalo Soldiers. These are African soldiers that were sent in to fight Indian wars. All right. This is a quote by Black Elk, who speaks out about Wounded Knee. I did not know then how much was ended. When I look back now from this high hill of my old age, I can still see the butchered women and children lying heaped and scattered along the crooked gulch as plain as when I saw them with eyes still young, and I can still see that something else died there in the bloody mud and was buried in the blizzard. A people's dream died there. It was a beautiful dream. That's really sad. The nation's hoop is broken and scattered. There is no center any longer, and the sacred tree is dead. Well, that's depressing. Oh, well, can't. I don't blame him for being upset. I would be too. All right. So out of this, let's see. Okay, so we're gonna stop there, and we're gonna talk about how cattle becomes big business in part 3.